Major production funding for Vote Utah 2016 comes from Domo, connecting people with data to change the way business is managed. Domo's customers include 20% of the Fortune 50, leveraging Domo to find insights in their data and take action to improve results. Domo, powered by the Business Cloud. Learn more at domo.com. Additional production funding comes from Utah Community Credit Union, celebrating 60 years of inspiring smart decisions. Founded on BYU campus, UCCU is a not-for-profit financial institution dedicated to the simple ideal of people helping people. UCCU.com has information on how UCCU can help families and the community. And from Nu Skin, demonstrating a more than 30-year commitment to the community and offering beauty and wellness products. Discover the best you at nuskin.com.
It's a few minutes from poll closing time in Utah. And in just moments, at 8 p.m. sharp, Vote Utah 2016 will project the outcomes of today's election based on Utah's only locally sponsored statewide exit poll. Interviewers have been calling early voters for more than 2 weeks, and hundreds of volunteer pollsters have continued surveying citizens today as they left voting locations. You'll learn the results of key races based on the mountain of data from those interviews next. This is Vote Utah 2016. Welcome back. With Dr. David Magleby, Distinguished Professor of Political Science at BYU, I'm Bruce Lindsay. The highly anticipated release of the Utah College's exit poll projections comes now. The polls have closed in Utah. It's 8 o'clock, and Dr. Magleby, we're eagerly awaiting.
Well, let's go right to the presidential race. Utah's been a battleground state. That's unusual for us. And Bruce, I have to tell you, this has been the most fascinating race to watch over the last few days. The early vote was heavily for Clinton. At one point today, it was very close. It's been widening, and therefore we will predict that Donald Trump will be the winner in Utah, 38% to 33%. That's as of now. There are still 6,000 respondents to our survey whose data has not been entered. We have 22,000 respondents at the moment. We feel that's a large enough sample size that we can declare Donald Trump the winner in the Utah presidential election this year.
Should we move on to the other highly anticipated races, 4th District?
In this case, we can't predict a race. Let's go to the 4th Congressional District graphic. Here, and I need to erase that check, and I'm going to do it right there, we cannot predict a winner. We're going to put a question mark by this one because it is too close to call. It is within the margin of error at this moment. Again, that could change, Bruce, as those 6,000 surveys are entered into the computer. That's happening as we speak. But there are also people still being interviewed. And so this race was one we'll update throughout the evening until we're confident it's a winnable or callable race for Mia Love or Doug Owens.
All right, for a number of weeks. We're going to take a break just a moment because we have someone very important to talk to right now, Dr. Magleby. Evan McMullen was looked at as a possible game changer in tonight's election with strong support early in previous polls in Utah. He is in Salt Lake tonight with 11 News' Ali Dave. Oh, he's alone. He's alone. Good evening, Mr. McMullen.
Good evening. How are you?
Thank you. Fine. I guess the bigger question is, how are you with this projection that shows in Utah you're polling at the moment 22% of the vote? What's your reaction to that after this most interesting campaign that you've waged the last several months?
Well, we feel very good about what we've done. We stood on principle for what is right, for key fundamental principles upon which our nation was founded. Someone needed to do this. We've started a new conservative movement in this country that I think will be critical for offering leadership to the nation in the future. And that's what we're doing. We're proud of what we've stood for in this race and proud of the team we built and all the supporters who have stood with us. And we're watching the returns come in eagerly, and we look forward to the future.
What kind of role do you foresee for yourself in that new conservative movement?
Well, I certainly think that Mindy Finn and I will, and the team are going to continue to drive it forward. We'll continue to lead it and build it and and also look to help the Republican Party make some critical reforms if that's possible. Of course, we've been skeptical for some time that is going to be possible, but we're willing to try. If not, then we think that constitutional conservatives will need to go off on their own. We'll need to establish a political party of their own that will reflect constitutional principles and true conservatism, meaning limited government, returning power to the states. If Donald Trump is to lead the Republican Party, if he is to lead the party down the road of populism and white nationalism, then this is just simply something we won't be able to be a part of. But we'll see what happens in this election. We'll see what happens afterwards, and we're looking forward to helping the country have better leadership, which it so desperately needs.
Mr. McMullen, if I could ask a question or two. Thank you for joining us. It's very kind of you. We'll be talking throughout the evening and happy to share with you after the night is over some of the data from this exit poll that I think you'll find very heartening. One of the elements is that many Republicans in Utah decided very, very late, either as they went to the polls today or in the last 48 hours before the election. And I think part of this is a reflection of the uncertainty they had, as we'll talk about, with Donald Trump as a candidate, which you spoke to during the campaign. To what extent do you think the Mike Pence visit to Utah, with the express purpose of bringing Republicans home, as he put it, had an impact on the vote?
There's so many other factors. I actually don't think that was too impactful. I think the real impact is the FBI's revelations of additional investigations or information about Hillary Clinton's email server and these kinds of information, or that kind of information. I think that had a much larger impact than the Mike Pence visit. I don't think the Mike Pence visit was that compelling, although maybe we'll have data afterwards that say it was. But I think it has more to do with people simply, and rightly so, being concerned about Hillary Clinton becoming our next president. I think that's probably a more compelling factor.
And then in terms of white nationalism, which is something you mentioned a moment ago, there was a robocall in Utah. I actually received one myself from a white nationalist. Do you think that kind of messaging, new to Utah politics in many ways, had an impact?
I just don't know. I wonder the same thing. There's just no way to know with any authoritative analysis without seeing the data itself. I hope not. That call from a white nationalist or a white supremacist was full of lies and misrepresentations about who I am and my policy positions. I hope Utah voters were able to see through that, but I guess we'll see. We'll see in the data ahead, and we'll see what kind of information you collect and others.
Regardless of how this turns out, Mr. McMullen, you've made this a very interesting race for all Utahns, and especially for the students doing this exit poll. We commend you for running for office.
Thank you very much. Pleasure.
Thank you, Evan McMullen. Shall we proceed with the other projections, or do you want to do a debrief right now on that race?
Let's go through the other projections, and then we'll come back and dig a little deeper on these. We also have the data, of course, on the other key races in Utah. In the contest between Lee and Snow for the U.S. Senate, this is one where we can again quickly project Mike Lee as having won re-election in a 2-to-1 margin. And as you look at the Democratic figures tonight, as we run through these races, compare those to the Hillary Clinton 33%. So she outperformed Snow, and we can go to some of the other contests now in the same way.
Which state?
Would we have 1st Congressional?
We've got the 1st Congressional. Clements and Bishop. Bruce, you're good. Keep doing that. Here, Rob Bishop, 53%, 28% for Clements. Note 7% voted for someone else and 3% skipped. We haven't always asked skipped on the poll, but because we assumed some people might be disaffected this year, we've included it. So a somewhat narrower margin at this moment in the 1st Congressional District, but again, there's still questionnaires to be counted. The sample is not complete, but it's a big enough margin that we can predict Bishop as the winner. Then we can go to the 2nd Congressional District. And here, in a closer race, Mr. Stewart is beyond the margin, and therefore we can project that he will win, but he is not yet over 50% of the vote. That's a little bit of a surprise. And in some of the early voting, we saw that Ms. Albaran was actually in the lead. So part of that Democratic surge in early voting gave us pause, but it's sufficient lead now for Stewart that we project him as the winner.
And in the 3rd Congressional District?
Here, a wider margin for Jason Chaffetz against Mr. Tryon, 64% for Chaffetz. We project him as the winner. And again, Skip was at around 4%, so a lot of voters did that. And one of the questions we'll look at, Bruce, is whether that may be some of the Trump voters who were annoyed by candidates like Chaffetz who criticized Trump. They later came back to Trump. Mm-hmm. But did some of those Trump people say, I'm not voting in that race at all? And that's a very distinct possibility.
Looking at those projections, they fall within the norm for those races in recent years, don't they?
Yes, it's about a 2-to-1 margin for Republicans over Democrats. That's what makes the Trump narrow victory. And up until about a half an hour ago, too close to call in Utah, a big surprise.
All right.
Here we've got the governor's race. Gary Herbert, comfortable win over Mr. Weinholz, 60%, 33%. We project that Governor Herbert will be reelected.
Should we go deeper on the numbers with your analyst here? You've got some crosstabs that I haven't seen that I'm sure.
Absolutely, we should. Joining us now is Brody Ray from North Carolina, near Durham. The name of the town again?
It's Pittsboro.
Pittsboro. We want to make sure people from Pittsboro know we care about them. Brody is a senior in political science, and she's been spending a lot of time with our data. Let's dig into the data. Where do you want to take us first, Brody?
So one of the best indicators of how a person's going to vote is their party identification. This year, it's a little different than it normally is. For Trump, he received 61% of Republican votes. So only 61% of people who identify as Republican voted for Trump. 31% of that went to McMullen. So that's very different from previous years.
Yes, Republicans were very divided.
Absolutely.
And what would the sort of benchmark be for previous years? I think that's now on the screen for our viewers.
So for Mitt Romney, 96% of Republicans voted for Mitt Romney. That's probably to be expected because Mitt Romney is LDS, and that's usually very common in the state of Utah. But even comparing to John McCain in 2008, John McCain had 90% of Republicans vote for him. So that 90 or 96% compared to Trump's 61% this year is a drastic change.
A 30% plus difference in the extent to which Republicans voted for the presidential candidate of their party. That has to be really not surprising. It really is a marker of how unusual this year was.
Yeah, absolutely. There was a lot of talk about Trump having a Mormon problem a couple of months ago, and I think we see that despite the projected win, that in these numbers, that seems to be a factor.
We can go now to an interview with Greg Hughes at Rice-Eccles Stadium. Mr. Hughes was very much involved in the Trump campaign with Allie. Allie, we're tossing to you.
Kind of step out.
Hi, I'm here with Greg Hughes, the representative for the state legislature. So how do you feel about Trump's performance in Utah and throughout his campaign?
Well, we've been saying all along that Utah is a red state, and happy to see that that is still the case, that we are a red state, and that the electoral votes for the state of Utah will go into the Trump column. And it's a great race tonight. It's very competitive. I think he's won Florida. I think he's ahead in Ohio. And so it is a horse race, and Utah is going to do its part.
Great. And what drove you to originally support Trump?
So it's a funny thing. We became a very relevant state in the spring, in about March, after the Super Tuesday elections, and received a call from Donald Trump Jr. I had met him during our general session. He was up on the dais with me and his daughter Kai, and we had a great visit. But I was at that time supporting Senator Rubio. And when Senator Rubio lost Florida, and Donald Trump had won Florida, his son Junior had called me because we had met and asked me if I would support him and his candidacy. And I said, only if you come to Utah and fight for Utah's support. And so he did. They came, and he made his case, and he's had Governor Pence here twice. And it's been fun for Utah to be really a state that's drawn a lot of attention. and for this Republican ticket to really fight for Utah's support, which I think you see tonight.
Great, thank you so much. And I believe Bruce Lindsay and Dr. Magleby have some questions for you back in the studio.
Sure.
Thanks.
I'm
My
happy
question
to
for
try to answer them.
Speaker Hughes is if he sees any down ballot effect from the Trump candidacy on the Utah races. I'm not sure he saw all of our projections tonight, but do you think that it changed the tenor of the Utah races?
So, that's a great question, and it's one that I look forward to seeing how this unfolds tonight, particularly the unaffiliated. We saw a record number of people registering to vote, unaffiliated, and we think that the presidential election was the inspiration for that, but how do those voters vote down ticket? Your guess would be as good. In fact, your guess is probably better than mine in this category, but we do think it's going to have an effect, but we're not quite sure. It's a bit of a wild card, the unaffiliateds, and how large of a block they've become in this race.
Well, Dr. Magleby has data. He doesn't have to guess, but what effect has Trump had on state party dynamics? There's some indications that the party is, well, they're physically divided tonight. Some of you are at Rice-Eccles Stadium, and some who never endorsed Trump are having their own party at a different location.
Well, I met the governor was here, and and the first lady of Utah was here, and I think they're gonna go back to the mansion. It is true. There have been top of the ticket, or at least there have been candidates on the Republican side that have not felt comfortable endorsing our Republican nominee. And I've got to say, it just contributes to one of these crazy years that we're all living through. And I don't really have an answer for it, other than to say that crazy things have gone on, and I wouldn't take it as an indicator or anything that you'd see going forward. I think the Republican Party is very strong here in Utah. I think you'll see that in the election results. And in terms of this, our ticket, well, we just had some that couldn't get behind him. But I think it's, like I said, I think it's been that kind of year.
Thank you. I would like to ask a follow-up question as well. You mentioned unaffiliated voters, and that a lot of the newly activated Trump supporters are unaffiliated. As you know, Speaker, in Utah, you can't vote in a Republican primary if you're unaffiliated. You have to register with the Republican Party. That's something Mr. Trump strongly disagrees with and has made a big issue out of nationally. Would you support removing that party registration requirement that you have to be a Republican to vote in a Republican primary?
So, in Pennsylvania, where I grew up, where I was 18, I got to vote for the first time with the Bush Quayle 88 campaign. I remember the elections person, as I was filling out my ballot or my registration form, they said if you want to vote in a Republican primary, you check the Republican box. If you'd like to vote in Democrat primaries, you check the Democrat box. And if you'd like to not participate in the party's primaries but vote in the general elections, you can be unaffiliated or independent. And it didn't strike me then as an offense. And so I think parties have the right to have their nominee chosen by those who affiliate with their party, but I'm open to ideas, and but it's not a glaring problem for me as I see it.
Okay, one follow-up question. There was a big difference tonight in the rate of Republican voting for this party standard bearer compared to 2008 and 2012, McCain and Romney. A more than 30% difference. A third of Republicans did not vote for their party's standard bearer. These are Republicans. Doesn't that suggest that there's a pretty big division in Utah?
Well, what was Evan McMullen's exit poll? What was his number? I didn't get to hear it.
22%.
Well, there you go. There's the difference right there. And I think it's one of those years again, but you have someone who represented himself very similar to Republican values, someone who was an alternative, but really arguing that he was the Republican alternative. And I think you see a number very similar to the one that you typically see in Utah between the two. And again, I think that the voters are voting right of center, but you did have the McMullen campaign, and him being LDS, I think, resonated very well with a lot of voters. And so that 28% would reflect, I think, the accumulative right of center, or what would typically be a Republican vote. So I think Utah voters are voting in the way we'd expect them to. But you had two candidates that were kind of claiming that crown, so to speak, in this election year.
Thank you.
Thank you very much,
Speaker of the House, Greg Hughes, along with Courtney Ellsworth. And let's go back to more of that data with Brody.
Well, Brody, we asked people about when they made up their mind. We thought that would be important in Utah this year. Is it?
Yes, it definitely is. We see from the data that we asked them if they made up their mind at the time of the party convention, a few months ago, a few days ago, or the day they voted. And for Trump, we see that 37% made up their mind a while ago that they were going to vote for Trump. 34% made up their mind months ago, and then 12% made up their mind today. Those numbers are quite different for McMullin. At the time of party convention, only 3% said that they had decided to vote for McMullin, which I'm not sure how.
They do seances at those homes.
Exactly. Whereas closer to 39% decided a few days ago they were going to vote for McMullin. So that might have had something to do with the Democratic turnout we had in the early voting and the surge in Republican voting that we had today on election day.
Well, I think it's pretty clear that Republicans were uncertain about how to vote, and the evidence in the time of their vote decision, I think, makes that case very clearly.
Absolutely.
Well, let's take a look at another piece of data. What's your next piece that you'd like to talk with us about?
So one thing that's very interesting, going back to the Trump-Clinton race especially, is the difference between people that were voting for Trump and people that were voting against Hillary.
Voting for a candidate or against the other person.
Exactly. So for Trump, those that voted for Donald Trump, 51% voted for him, and 49% were voting against.
So it's about a 50-50 split, with roughly 50% saying they were really voting against him by voting for somebody else.
Exactly. For Hillary Clinton, the number was still pretty split, but more people were voting for her rather than against her.
And McMullin?
And for McMullin, there were 61% voting for him and 39% voting against another candidate.
That's an interesting interpretation, isn't it? Because as a third party or an independent candidate, it's kind of a protest.
That's right. Mm-hmm. But I think he, as he said in his interview with us, he tried to strike some themes that would be responsive with Utah. I think he gave people a reason to vote for him, but also pointed out the inconsistencies and limitations of both Clinton and Trump. You can vote against them while still voting for me for a reason, I think he might say.
Absolutely.
Well, then we had a historic moment in this race, didn't we? What's that?
For the first time in history, we had a woman candidate for the president.
So did we ask Utah voters about how they felt about that?
We absolutely did. We asked them that despite if they voted for Hillary or if they agreed with her policies, if it would be a historic, monumental moment if we had a woman president for the first time.
What did they say?
And overwhelmingly, the Democrats agreed that it would be historic. 74% for women thought it was very important, 65% for Democratic men. The numbers for Republicans were lower, but still pretty large. 23% of men found it to be very important, and 21% of women.
Okay. It'd be fun to go back. In earlier years, we haven't had time to do this because we asked similar questions about the first African-American president. So it'll be interesting historically to compare 2008 and 2016 when we had these potential precedent-setting elections, race and gender. And of course, it's still too soon to know what's happening nationally.
Exactly.
We have projected that Donald Trump will carry Utah. Thank you very much, Brody.
Thank you.
What in all of that data, Dr. Magleby, strikes you as surprising, if anything at all?
Well, I think it's surprising that McMullin did as well as he did. This is a person who was completely unknown. As Brody said, those 3% who decided to vote for him before the convention must have been from his neighborhood in Virginia, and they moved to Utah or something.
And he declared?
He had not declared. No, he declared very late. And the reason that was important is it meant he couldn't get on the ballot in several states. He was so late in declaring. It was part of an effort to recruit some other Republican to run against Trump, and that had not borne fruit with more visible people. And McMullin then stepped forward fairly late. And I believe it was a concerted strategy to reach voters in the Intermountain West, Utah, Idaho, Nevada, perhaps parts of Arizona, and build a sort of a statement against the Trumpism in the Republican Party. And sort of go from basically being completely unknown to getting 22% of the vote in any state is a remarkable accomplishment.
And in earlier polls, he had a larger percentage.
He did.
Those polls could have been incorrect, or does that represent the coming home to what is familiar?
Well, as we talked with Christian earlier, it's very hard for a third-party candidate to have the credibility with voters that it's a real vote, and it's going to really matter, and you might make a difference with your vote that way. And that's why I think the Pence visit probably was pretty important. We'll see later as we look at some data and see how Utahns feel about Mike Pence as compared to Donald Trump. But I don't think it was a mistake that it was Mike Pence that came to Utah to tell Republicans to vote Republican and not Donald Trump again.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Magleby. Should we go back to our analysts who are following some of the key developments across the country, Senate races, and how the presidential race is playing out across the various states?
We should. We have Elizabeth Garces with us, who's from American Forks. She's a senior in political science, and she's in the industrial heartland, as many people have been calling it in this race. Elizabeth, let's start with the Ohio presidential race. Has that one been called?
It has not been called. It is way too close to call. We go back from Trump leading to Clinton leading, and at this moment, we can't call it.
Well, when we do, we'll come back to you because we're going to want you to help us understand which way it tilts. And it's interesting that it's that close. Both parties and both sides knew it would be important. Let's shift then to the Michigan presidential. This was a surprise, Elizabeth, that we saw as much activity in Michigan as we did over the last few days. Why?
This was a surprise. It was very interesting to see Ivanka Trump, Tiffany Trump, Hillary Clinton, President Obama, and Donald Trump and Mike Pence there yesterday. They finished off with the Republican Party at 11 o'clock. And
maybe there were no more hotel rooms after all of those people and their entourages.
Exactly. It was a very hot place to be. But at this time, this race is too close to call as well, although we've seen that both parties have put a significant effort into campaigning and getting the word out to the people. In Michigan? Yes.
That is such a surprise. I don't think a month ago we would have thought that it would be competitive. It's a sign of how topsy-turvy this cycle has been.
Perhaps the other surprise, Dr. Magleby, I'm looking at a map from the New York Times. Ohio and Michigan and Wisconsin right now, Trump is leading in the vote count in every one of those upper Midwestern states.
Wow. This could be a very interesting but a very long evening if this trend that Elizabeth is telling us about holds. Let's shift to the neighboring state of Wisconsin. It's the state of Paul Ryan, the Speaker of the House, who's had his own kind of struggles in figuring out what to say about the Republican standard bearer. How is Wisconsin going tonight?
Wisconsin is in the same boat as the other two states. We're looking at something that is too close to call. We were looking at Wisconsin being one of the main deciding factors, although Trump canceled his visit to visit them, the state on Sunday. And so we're looking at this one as a heated race, but not as heated as the other two.
Let's take a look at the Electoral College map that we've prepared. And now that Elizabeth has given us a sense of what's going on in those Midwestern states of Michigan, Wisconsin, and Ohio, we had colored Michigan a sort of a light blue. It hasn't been called yet. And Wisconsin is a pure toss-up, as is Ohio. So Elizabeth's information about Michigan being very competitive tonight means that's a very interesting breakthrough. But you can see that Mr. Trump now has secured victories in large parts of the country, from Idaho through the Dakotas and then down to Texas. By the way, when we had our break at the last hour, I checked, and Oklahoma was called correctly at the correct time. They closed the polls very early there in Oklahoma. And you can see the other states from Missouri through the rest of that interior South and South Carolina. But I think it's important and interesting to note that the networks have not projected Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, New Hampshire, and Ohio. So Mr. Trump, for him to be able to win, has to pick up several of those states.
We don't have an electoral vote total on that map, but the information I'm looking at, Dr. Magleby, says at the moment, Donald Trump has 140 electoral votes to Hillary Clinton's 109. Now, there's a lot of the country to play out, but he has the early electoral lead.
Well, he does, but some of the big states haven't closed yet. California, Oregon, and Washington.
Sure, the whole West Coast
almost certainly to be Clinton states. But you're right. I think it's too soon to tell. And as you can see, that battleground of Virginia awaits further information as well. Elizabeth, we're just told that Ohio went for Trump. I don't know if you've gotten that word as well.
I got the same word.
And so what is our decision rule tonight? We call a state only when?
We have 2 or 3 other news networks have announced it.
Okay, so Ohio goes for Trump. Bruce, that is a big deal.
That is big. If he has Florida and Ohio, he is a player tonight.
He's a real player, and this Utah electoral vote may be really
significant.
critical. One of the reasons McMullen got in the race, as he announced it, was if he could win a state, he then could be competitive in the Electoral College if no other candidate had 270. He would be eligible for House votes in the House of Representatives. I don't think that was talked about enough in the campaign, frankly, from his point of view. And it meant that the Utah electoral vote could be important in determining the next president, and it could have been somebody other than Trump or McMullen. But again, I think that kind of got lost in the wash. McMullen was underfunded. Some of his campaign themes were
Only about $1 million.
Yes, not a lot of money. Elizabeth, let's now talk about some of those Senate races in your region. We were in Wisconsin with you a moment ago. What about the Senate race there?
So this Senate race is so exciting. We've got Russ Feingold and Ron Johnson, and things with them were Russ Feingold has been leading pretty much the past couple of months. However, recently we see that Ron Johnson has had help from super PACs to raise funding so that he could have campaign ads.
And has that made a difference? Has the race tightened?
That has made a huge difference. The race has been within 1% for both candidates in the last couple of days.
And no one has made a projection on the Wisconsin Senate race yet?
We have seen that Feingold may take it, but it is still too close to call.
So, okay, we'll hold because 2 networks have not projected it. I think we have actually an ad, a Feingold ad, that helps us understand his candidacy. Let's go to that now.
Okay, perfect.
An economy rigged for the wealthy, and Ron Johnson's made it worse. Johnson took a shady $10 million corporate payout, then went to Washington and voted to protect corporate tax loopholes for companies shipping Wisconsin jobs overseas, supported privatizing Social Security, which would hand billions to Wall Street, and wants to eliminate the federal minimum wage. Senator Johnson works for Wall Street, not us. Senate Majority PAC is responsible for the content of this advertising.
Wow, that's a pretty hard-hitting ad. Who's the Senate Majority PAC?
The Senate Majority PAC is a super PAC that helps the Democratic Party, as we saw in the ad. We have 2 super PACs that have been helping Johnson and Feingold in this election. A super PAC is a new form of money that has been coming in through a political action committee since 2010.
That's right.
Elizabeth, this is a rematch, of course. These 2 candidates faced each other 6 years ago. How has Ron Johnson conducted his campaign? What have been his issues?
He has been using super PAC money from the Reform American Fund and the Let America Work. He has one of the wealthiest people in the state who has donated $54 million, and her name is Diane Hendricks.
One person's given $54 million to super PACs to elect Ron Johnson.
Yes.
Has that been an issue in Wisconsin?
It has been an issue. Feingold came out and said that he had not received super PAC money, although it came back to say that he had received it, and they have both been receiving this money. But because of the money that Diane was able to give, Ron Johnson has been able to make a significant amount of campaigning ads and get his message out there.
And are the tones of those ads positive or negative?
They are very negative for both candidates.
Do you have an example of one from the Johnson side?
Yes, I do. We can go ahead and show that right now.
The VA scandal. Our veterans died while waiting for care, victims of incompetence and neglect. Long before the headlines, Russ Feingold voted 13 times against our veterans. Feingold voted against improving veterans' access to health care, against emergency funding for veterans programs, against critical funding for the VA. Our vets risked everything. Russ Feingold, he's just a career politician. That's why we fired him in the first place. Senate Leadership Fund is responsible for the content of this advertising.
So tell us about the Senate Leadership Fund.
The Senate Leadership Fund is another super PAC that helps different senators, congressmen with money to fund campaign ads.
Okay, on the Republican side, it sounds like.
Yes, it is.
Well, let's shift now, since this one's too close to call, to one nearby that has generated a lot of attention, but has developed in different ways. Ohio. Tell us about the Ohio Senate race.
The Ohio Senate race had Ted Strickland was the Democratic Party and Rob Portman was the incumbent Republican. And the race, the whole couple months that it has been going on, we have seen Portman taking the lead, and we just received news that he has actually won.
So he's been projected to be the winner.
Yes.
Hey, when this cycle started, Elizabeth, a lot of people thought that Ohio was going to be one of the very, very competitive races. What happened?
There were a few things that happened with the Ohio race. First off, Rob Portman did not endorse Trump. He came out and made it clear that he was going to put in Pence's name for president. Also, Governor John Kasich also wrote in another name for his ballot, and so that made it hard for Trump to really get his foot in there as far as the big leaderships, which one they would vote for. As we see with Rob Portman and Ted Strickland, Rob Portman was Republican and he had more of a pull with Pence. Ted Strickland was a lot older. He wasn't able to get his campaign and fundraising money out quick enough so that he did not carry the lead in this race.
Well, and the outside money didn't materialize
Yes.
for Strickland as much because it tends to go where the races are, and once you stumble or stub your toe, the money doesn't stay.
Yep, that's exactly right.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth.
Thank you.
At this point, we're going to say goodbye to our listeners on KBYU Classical, FM Classical 89, who've been listening the past hour, to our viewers on TV and the internet at voteutah.org. Please stay with us. We're going to take a short break right now and then be back with more reporting and analysis of today's elections, including updates on the control of the United States Senate, interviews with candidates about the outcomes of their campaigns, and more from deep down in the data, how and why Utah voters made their choices. That's all still ahead on KBYU 11's Vote Utah 2016. Welcome back to Vote Utah 2016, KBYU TV's coverage of today's elections in Utah and across the country, featuring the exclusive Utah Colleges exit poll. I'm Bruce Lindsay with Dr. David Magleby at the Political Science Department of BYU and director of the poll, from which we're learning so much tonight.
Well, we are, and that's thanks to the work of literally thousands of students who are still working, Bruce. They're still interviewing voters at polling places where the lines were long. We will be there until the last voters leave. And they're still entering data. I was told just before we went on at 8 o'clock that there were 6,000 questionnaires that had not been entered yet. There'd been a backlog because there were so many people filling them out. And to send them to Provo, we do remote data entry, but even at that, it was a backlog. So it's due to the efforts of thousands of students, one of whom is McCade Claypool, a senior in political science from Spokane, Washington. Well, welcome, McCade, and thanks to you for all your hard work. Let's talk a little bit about how Utahns felt about these two candidates, really the three candidates. Let's go there.
Absolutely. So I think that one thing that's most interesting about it is that the two people that had the most popular votes actually were the least popular when it comes to favorability. If you look here up on the, we're actually looking at the most important issues, which is great. We'll go to that then. So with these most important issues.
There's favorability.
There's our favorability chart. Perfect. So when we look at these, it's actually interesting to note that Trump and Clinton, now these are the average ratings.
And give them the range.
Absolutely.
It's from what to what? It's there in this.
So 1 is unfavorable and 5 is favorable. So you can see there, so for instance, with Mitt Romney, he had the highest rating on average, followed interestingly by Trump's VP, Mike Pence, with Trump and Clinton being down at the bottom with the lowest average favorability rankings.
But contrast the difference between Trump and McMullen, 3.49 to 2.16.
I think this is really interesting to note that Trump was by far less favorable to voters, and yet he got more votes than McMullen.
And one thing that we'll dig in on, we may not have done this yet, will be to look at people who voted for Trump, how they evaluated Trump and McMullen. Mm-hmm. Did they actually see McMullen more favorably, but they decided to vote their party?
You know, I think that's a question that we can definitely delve into, because one of the questions we did ask in the survey was whether they would have voted for someone else if they had thought that person could win. Unfortunately, I don't have the numbers in front of me right now, but that's definitely something.
Well, we're here for a long time, McKay.
That's
Keep
true.
working on the numbers.
I'll come back.
Did voters identify for you their most important issue? Is that one of the crosstabs we have to look at tonight?
Absolutely is. Yes, absolutely. So for those most important issues, interestingly enough, jobs in the economy and also national security were the most important issues for voters. And surprising, at least to me, was that immigration and Obamacare was the least important of all issues.
Really?
Yeah.
For all the discussion that those received on either side?
Yeah, I think, you know, and it's just something that is interesting that for those that have, when you're looking at this graphic here, and it talks about the different issues that we've asked voters about, for every single issue, if they thought it was the most or very important, they were more likely to vote for Trump. You can see that in the Trump column there. Clinton has, for budget deficit, Clinton has 20%, Trump 55%, and McMullen 25%. That trend continues all the way down. So for the Supreme Court, Obamacare, immigration, security, and so on, if voters in Utah thought that was the most important issue, they voted for Trump.
What stands out to me also is an issue that Trump made a lot of and that Utahns made a lot of in calling on people to vote for Trump. It's the bottom issue on this chart, the Supreme Court.
Absolutely.
54% of people who voted for Trump said the Supreme Court was very important to their decision. 23% for Clinton and McMullen said that. That may have been a driving force in getting Republicans to come back to their party and vote for Trump, even though earlier in the campaign McMullen was doing better and appeared that he might even win Utah.
I think you're absolutely right. And it's interesting when you look at even those that are very active Mormons with religious freedom and their feelings about that in the Supreme Court, that number actually jumps up to 60% who voted for Trump.
Okay, so the Supreme Court issue is a thing we'll want to dig in a lot more on in our later research.
Absolutely.
Let's talk a little more about some of the other issues you looked at. We asked about a set of candidate attributes, and we did this based upon a collaboration with CBS News, where they were sharing information with us about how they were asking questions, and we told them how to ask about religion in Utah. They didn't know how to ask about religion. They would ask if you were a practicing Mormon, Catholic, or Jew. And we explained that in Utah, Bruce, we don't talk that way. We have a word that they didn't use at CBS.
Active?
Active. And they thought, what does that mean? Do you do calisthenics? Yeah. And we said, no, that's how people self-classify here. So they changed their questionnaire to include active, very active, somewhat active, as we do. Well, let's talk about some of those attributes that the CBS people used and that we did as well.
Absolutely. So one of the things that are really interesting is that, so like I said, both feel that Utah voters feel that both Trump and Clinton don't respect their values. They feel that Trump and Clinton don't respect Utah values. There's an overwhelming majority. This graphic that you're seeing is the percent that said no. So you have 71% said that Clinton doesn't respect Utah values, 71% for Trump. Now, what's interesting is that as you go down farther, Trump is viewed less moral than Clinton, and yet they feel that Trump is more truthful. So,
well, but the race is to the bottom here. I mean, this is amazing. 76% say Clinton isn't moral, and 83% say Trump isn't moral. This should have given an entree for McMullen.
You would think. You would think.
I mean, voters must have been holding their noses with respect to Utah values, their values. In both cases.
Absolutely.
These are Clinton and Trump voters in these columns, just
yes.
to be sure.
So these are those. Yeah, those are Clinton and Trump voters. Yep.
What about some other candidate attributes that we looked at? We asked a whole bunch. I know you've sorted on some, and you're going to tell us which ones you think were most interesting.
Absolutely. So one of the things that we asked voters is we gave them a bunch of attributes, and we said, you know, how much do you agree or disagree that this candidate has this trait? So for instance, there's compassion, there is character to be president, respect for men and women. Interestingly, overall, the candidates were viewed very similarly. On average, you know, their average score between strongly agreeing and strongly disagreeing was, you know, just right at a 2 for most. The things that mattered more than anything else that were differences was the Supreme Court, respect for men and women, care for voters, and the right view on Muslims, actually.
Did you ask a question on the historic nature of this election in that there was a woman at the top of the ticket for one of the major parties?
Yes, so that was actually one that Brody had talked about with this idea that women, especially Democratic women, were by far thought it was a very historical thing.
But let's talk a little bit about how those issues there were differences. So on the Muslim question, Was that something that they had a better regard for Clinton than for Trump on? Was that a problem for Trump in Utah?
It was. So they thought that Clinton had a much better view on Muslims than Trump.
What about treatment of women, regard for women and men?
Again, and I think largely because of the video that was linked to Trump.
The Access Hollywood video.
Absolutely. Trump was viewed as not respecting women and men nearly as much as Clinton was. Interestingly, though, Utahns actually thought that Trump was better on immigration in his views than Clinton was.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to have to dig in on that immigration issue then. We have a set of several questions that we can go back to in a later segment.
Yep.
So does it mean that that poses questions that we'll want to explore? Does that mean Utahns are hostile to legal immigration or to a pathway to citizenship? All of those kinds of questions.
Right. And so actually, the data actually shows differently to that. So when you're talking about pathway to citizenship, they believe that a majority believes that a president should actually propose a path to citizenship.
A majority of Utahns favors that policy.
They do, and yet for some reason they think that Trump has the right views on immigration.
Is it typical that you have that disconnect in a poll like this where the numbers don't all seem to add up?
Yeah, because I think they're thinking of the candidate and then they're thinking about the policy, and they may not connect the two. What do you think, McKay?
I think you're absolutely right. I think that their personal opinions on how people, so for instance, refugees and allowing refugees in Utah, an overwhelming majority of them said yes, refugees should be allowed in Utah.
Refugees from?
From Syria.
Specifically from Syria.
Specifically from Syria.
Which has been so controversial nationally, you'll remember. And
Governor Herbert said that they were welcome here.
Yes. So that's why we asked it in those specific terms. Should refugees from Syria be welcome in Utah? Should they be welcome in the U.S.? And what did we find?
And they said absolutely that they should be welcome. And I think it just shows the divisiveness and the dividedness of this campaign.
And so, I'm sorry, and there should be a path to citizenship.
And there should
that was
be a path
the
to
modal
citizenship.
response.
Yeah.
So if you're a politician, how do you navigate this field?
No idea. I think we're still scratching our heads even with the data.
Maybe that's why you're going to go to law school. Maybe we'll talk you into political science. We're not done yet.
Maybe.
Well, thank you, McCade, very much. My understanding is that Senator Mike Lee is available and ready to talk to us. That'd be a treat.
Dania Rice there at the NOAA's Event Center. Dania, we're excited to hear what the senator has to say as he's projected to be the winner tonight to return for a second term of the U.S. Senate.
He just gave his acceptance speech about 10 minutes ago, and congratulations. Here we go. 1 second. Hi. There's a lot of supporters here right now, you can see.
That's all we can do sometimes, you know. It's not...
Congratulations.
Oh, thank you.
So first off, as depending on the night goes, what are you going to do with Merrick Garland?
That remains to be seen. My position hasn't changed. I've said in the past the next president needs the opportunity to do that, and my position hasn't changed as far as I know. The position of the Republican conference in the Senate hasn't changed either.
How did you feel like your re-election went this year?
Well, I'm thrilled with the outcome. We don't have all the results in yet, but what we've seen so far is very encouraging. And they called the race for me. I'm very grateful to the people of Utah that they give me the opportunity to continue serving Utah in the Senate.
Thank you, Senator Lee. We're going to send it back to studio with Dr. Magleby and Bruce Lindsay, and they'll have a couple questions for you.
Senator, you did not endorse Donald Trump. In fact, at one point you called on him to quit. Do you think any other position would have made any difference in the outcome of this race for you?
I'm sure you're asking me a question that is really good. I can't hear a word.
So you did not endorse Donald Trump. What's your position now? Who did you vote for?
I voted for Evan McMullin.
And my question, can you hear me, Senator?
He can't hear.
He can't hear. Dania, perhaps you could ask him if he thinks that his position...
You can hear me, but
I'll ask
you can hear them, but I can't hear them. Maybe.
No, I'll ask the questions for you. You did not endorse you did not endorse Donald Trump. Who did you vote for?
I voted for Evan McMullin.
And does he think it made any difference in the outcome of his race, his position or non-position on Donald Trump?
Do you think it made a difference on... Sorry, I could not hear that question. Can you redo that?
Just did it make any difference? It was a big issue. He got a lot of national press for calling on Donald Trump to withdraw, and I just wonder at the end of the day if he thinks it made any difference.
Do you think it made any difference? It was a big national thing, and we're looking for an endorsement. Do you think yours made a difference?
I'm sorry, I don't understand the question. Do I think I didn't make an endorsement? I didn't endorse Donald Trump. I didn't endorse...
But did that make a difference in this election?
I have no idea. You'll have to ask the voters of Utah. Mine was a protest vote. Look, I made my concerns clear, my concerns with the Democratic nominee, Hillary Clinton, and I also made my concerns clear with respect to Donald Trump. I registered a protest vote for Evan McMullin, and I did so for reasons that I've explained previously.
Let's see if there's any more questions back in
studio.
studio.
Yes, I do. If I could ask a question, I'll try and keep it short because I know it's hard to relay questions. We asked the voters of Utah what they thought the U.S. Senate should do with respect to the Garland confirmation.
I'm not sure why you gave me this. This doesn't work at all.
Go ahead and ask that one more time.
So we asked the voters of Utah about the Garland nomination and what they thought the Senate should do. And we're going to pull up the data on that right now.
They're pulling up the data right now to see what Utah said about the Supreme Court seat.
And I'm sure it's coming. Here we go.
If you'd like me to come back later after they send you the questions, I'd be happy to do that.
No, the Senate,
Right now.
the voters in Utah, majority of voters in Utah said the Senate should vote
said
on Merrick
that they
Garland.
should vote on Merrick Garland. What do you think about that? Are you going to fight him in, or?
Look, I've made my position on Merrick Garland clear. I've made it clear before the election, and I've also made it clear after the election. I've made it clear that after the election, my position wouldn't be changing. The fact is that I've said all along, and most of my Republican colleagues in the Senate agree with me, that this ought not be processed this time around. I don't even believe that there is time to process a Supreme Court nomination right now between now and the end of the year. We've got just a few weeks left in the lame duck session. My understanding is that it will not come up, and I support that decision.
Thank you. Please thank the senator.
Thank you.
Let's look at the fate of some other senators around the country tonight. Let's go back to our regional analyst, Orlo Ayer, who is a senior in American Studies from Provo, Utah, is looking at the races in the Midwest, Illinois, and Indiana. Is there a call, Orlo, in Indiana Senate race now?
Surprisingly, yes, there is. Evan Bly has gone down to defeat, and Todd Young has captured that Senate seat in Indiana.
I'm sorry, Orlo, I couldn't hear that. Would you please repeat that?
Congressman Todd Young has won the Senate seat in Indiana.
So this is Republicans holding a seat the Democrats hoped very much to pick up.
Exactly. And it's always been known that Indiana would play a significant role in who controls the U.S. Senate. And all along, the key question was whether Evan Bly could come back and recapture the seat that he held for 12 years, that he vacated 6 years ago.
Orlo, we're going to need to interrupt for a second. We've got Peter Caroon with Lucy Liu at the Democratic Party headquarters.
Lucy, if you can hear us, we're happy to have you talk to Peter Caroon.
Can you hear? He's on. Great. Yeah.
Well, let me ask a question. Peter, thanks for joining us this evening. Really, not a lot of bright spots, if any bright spots, for the Democratic Party in Utah tonight. What reason do you hold out hope for believing that there is a future for the party in the state of Utah? It's been a drubbing tonight.
Well, we haven't seen any results officially yet. There's still a lot of people waiting in line. We still have 2-hour lines in some places, especially in Democratic areas. So we think it's too early to call some of the races, especially those close ones. So we're still optimistic that things will change tonight as the night goes on.
Well, based on the Utah College's exit poll, we are projecting the presidential race, it's Trump. The Senate race, it's Lee. The House 1, 2, and 3, it's all Republican candidates. Too close to call still on 4.
Right.
And it's a Republican incumbent for governor. So that's a tough dessert tonight, isn't it?
Well, as Democrats in Utah, obviously, we're always optimistic. And, our focus obviously has been on the state races. We recognize that the statewide races and the congressional races are very tough. So we put a lot of effort into our state House and Senate races. And that's where we hope to see some changes tonight. And also, as you mentioned, the Congressional District 4 is still too close to call. And I think that's where we're hoping, keeping a lot of hope as well.
Could I ask a question of you, Peter? Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Great. We had for a time today the race too close to call for president. That was in part due to the early voting that Democrats had done throughout the state, but especially in Salt Lake County. What was the party's effort to bank the vote or get the early vote? We'd like to know about that.
We spent a lot of time, I mean, hundreds and hundreds of hours and thousands of phone calls, knocking on doors. We had the Hillary Clinton campaign here working to get out the vote. We've had the Doug Owens campaign, and with a lot more effort and money to get people out to vote this year as well. And then the Democratic Party, we made it our priority as well to focus on get out the vote this year. And so I think we had some successes in that, and hopefully we'll see some results that show that get out the vote effort made the difference in tonight's elections.
Given the substantial Republican margin in the other 3 House races, the U.S. Senate race and the governor's race, are you surprised that Doug Owens is as close to Mia Love in the vote tonight as he is?
No, we saw polls that we knew were not accurate and knew this was going to be a repeat of 2014, and which is exactly, I think, is what it is. And obviously, we're hoping for Doug to come out and win tonight and get a Democratic representative back in Congress. I think not having a Democrat in Congress from Utah hurts this state, and so we hope Doug Owens will be the shining light tonight. And we certainly thank our other congressional candidates who ran this year on the Democratic ticket. They were great candidates. Obviously, it's a tough row to hoe in this state because of gerrymandering of our districts, but I think Doug is that shining light that we hope to see a positive result by if not tonight, by Thursday when they give the additional election results.
Thank you, Mr. If Doug Owens is the shining light, as you hope, one of the major candidates in your party called him Democratic light for not being not holding to the party line closely enough. Do you face a challenge in either deciding between party orthodoxy or acceptability with the electorate in some of these races? Which is the imperative for you?
We don't have a litmus test in the Democratic Party. We have very liberal Democrats. We have conservative Democrats. Frankly, I've been called Democrat light too, but I'm the chair of the Utah Democratic Party, and my delegates were willing to support me because we don't have that litmus test. And we think Doug Owens is being who Doug Owens is, and that's for us the most important thing, is to have an authentic candidate rather than somebody who's pretending to be who they're not.
Peter Caroon, Democratic State Chairman, thank you very much for joining us this evening from
Thank you.
Salt Lake City. Thank you. Let's go back to Orlo Air. We interrupted you, Orlo, right in the middle of the Midwestern Senate report. Indiana has stayed with Republican?
Yes, this has turned into a major disappointment for the Democrats in Indiana. Evan Bayh was recruited specifically to win this Senate seat, and when he announced his candidacy, he came in with an immediate 20-point lead. And to show how this has shifted, tonight's results show that Todd Young has won by approximately 10 points. So that's a 30-point
So it's not a small
shift.
Margin, it's a pretty wide margin.
That's a huge 30-point shift, and largely because of the attack ads that have portrayed Evan Bayh as a super lobbyist who's out of touch with the citizens of Indiana.
Let's see one of those ads.
Yes.
If it seems like Washington's rigged for the well-connected, that's because it is. Career politicians and lobbyists won't fix it. It's time to send in the Marines. In the Marine Corps, we're taught to put America above ourselves, and Hoosiers deserve a senator who does the same. I'm Todd Young, I'm a Hoosier, I'm a Marine, and I'm running for U.S. Senate because it's time for regular Hoosiers to stand up and do the job career politicians won't.
Wow.
Yes, in another ad that we don't have time to show, but it definitely portrays the fact that Evan Bayh earned a lot of money by being a lobbyist in Washington, D.C. Rather humorously, when he was asked by a reporter what his address was of his residence in Indiana, he stumbled and gave the wrong answer.
Well, he doesn't know.
We hardly knew you, even after he'd been a senator
Doesn't know where he lives. Well, you wouldn't believe that if you saw one of his ads. Let's see one of the Bayh ads, which doesn't convey that lack of connection at all.
Yes.
My opponent is attacking me as a lobbyist. Well, that's just a lie. But here's what is true. I've cut taxes. I've helped save 100,000 Indiana auto jobs. I fought for welfare reform, pushed for a balanced budget. I've taken on the extremes of both parties, and I always will, to get things done. Lobby? No way. Lobs? You bet. I'm Evan Bayh, and I approve this message. And so do my boys.
Well, great ad, but it didn't seem to work, right?
No, you know, his two boys there are 21 years old. They were born when he was the governor of the state of Indiana. And the Bayh name in Indiana holds a major significance.
But probably not so much after tonight.
Not after tonight. This has been a serious blow to Evan Bayh's legacy.
Yeah.
Next door, Orlo, in Illinois, have they called that race yet?
Yes, that race has been called, and that has gone to the Democrats. Tammy Duckworth has won that race over incumbent Senator Mark Kirk.
That's a pickup for the Democrats then?
That is a pickup for the Democrats. And, you know, we've got a clip here. I don't know if that's ready to show, but concerning a debate that took place last week, which was a key turning moment in this race.
My family has served this nation in uniform, going back to the Revolution. I'm a daughter of the American Revolution. I've bled for this nation, but I still want to be there in the Senate when the drums of war sound, because people are quick to sound the drums of war, and I want to be there to say, this is what it costs, this is what you're asking us to do, and if that's the case, I'll go. Families like mine are the ones that bleed first. But let's make sure that American people understand what we are engaging in, and let's hold our allies accountable, because we can't do it all.
Senator Kirk, 30 seconds to rebut.
I had forgotten that your parents came all the way from Thailand to serve George Washington.
Move on to the next question.
That was a fairly benign moment to many people, but if you notice the awkward silence that followed Senator Kirk's comment, it was one of mocking sarcasm to her heritage and the fact that her ancestors on her father's side go back to the American Revolution. What we need to remember about Tammy Duckworth is she is a true American hero, having lost both of her legs in Iraq when her helicopter was shot down. She was a pilot of a Black Hawk helicopter. Well,
it appears that the voters of Illinois agree with your assessment, and at that moment, while it may have seemed benign to some, was not seen as benign by most Illinois voters.
So that's the seat that belonged to Barack Obama.
This is Obama's seat. The Democrats have been itching for it for a very long time. Thank you very much, Orlo.
You're welcome.
We are going to take a station break, is that right? No, well, we've got time for the electoral map. Let's take a look at the electoral map as it continues to get more colorful. There are, the dark red have been called by at least two networks. The lighter red are leaning, same with blue and light blue, and we don't have their electoral vote count, Dr. Magleby.
No.
I'd love to have one.
It would be useful to have. You can see that both Colorado and New Mexico appear to have been called.
That's significant.
And Virginia. New York was predictable. So we're waiting really still on New Hampshire and Pennsylvania, North Carolina,
and Florida.
Georgia and Florida.
Florida. All right, take a station break, is that the plan?
That is.
All right, we'll be back then with updated exit projections and a careful look at how Clinton and Trump are faring in those battleground states. That map should clarify a great deal in the coming hour, and more interviews with Utah politicians. You're watching Vote Utah 2016. We'll be right back.
Utah College's exit poll is a joint collaboration among Utah's public and private colleges and universities. More than 1,200 students across many academic disciplines volunteer to talk to voters. They reach out to them during early voting and vote-by-mail days by way of telephone surveys. On Election Day, they interview citizens as they leave voting locations after voting. The KBYU Utah College's exit poll gratefully acknowledges the contributions of students and supervising faculty at Utah institutions of higher learning for their generous donation of time and energy in making this project possible. Major financial support for conducting the KBYU Utah Colleges exit poll comes from the Semnani Family Foundation, promoting research, education, and civic initiatives in Utah and around the world. Additional financial support is generously provided by the following Brigham Young University entities: the BYU Mentored Research Fund, the College of Family, Home, and Social Sciences, the Center for the Study of Elections and Democracy, the Department of Political Science, the Department of Statistics, and the School of Communications.